بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه وسلم. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. So last week we started our discussion on the Isra wal Mi'raj. And we talked about how the Isra wal Mi'raj is probably one of the most detailed accounts of the Seerah. So there's a lot of narrations that talk about the Isra wal Mi'raj, a lot of companions that talk about the Isra wal Mi'raj. So what's interesting about the narrations, specifically about the Isra wal Mi'raj, is that the narrations regarding the Isra wal Mi'raj tend to have a lot of different details. So one companion will have for example, Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he will have certain details when recounting the Isra wal Mi'raj, versus Aisha radiallahu anha will have certain details when recounting the Isra wal Mi'raj. And they're not necessarily contradicting details, they're additional details, right? So it's difficult for the scholars to kind of have to piece together the whole entire details and kind of create a timeline for the Isra wal Mi'raj. Now the good news is many scholars have already done this for us, so there's no need for somebody to kind of come reinvent the wheel and try to piece things together already. So alhamdulillah, that has already been done, but just to appreciate the fact that our scholars did take the time to put everything together and piece the puzzle together of this miraculous journey of the Isra wal Mi'raj, right? So we're also in this stage right now where we're going to be talking about the Isra wal Mi'raj in detail, but also not in detail, in the sense that we're trying to do an overview of the Isra wal Mi'raj first, and then we're going to come back and talk about specific issues in detail later on. So, as I'm going through this, you might be thinking, why did he just skip over this detail? Why did he not cover this portion or this portion? I promise we're going to get to it, right? But I wanted to give everybody an entire overview of the Isra wal Mi'raj first before we dive into the details of it, inshallah ta'ala. So now when it comes to the journey of Isra wal Mi'raj, so far what we have talked about is that the journey began with 3 angels visiting the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Jibreel, Mikael, and then another angel that was not named, right? And so 3 angels visited the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to cleanse his heart. Now, not from filth or anything bad, but because he had had 12 years of hardship, a lot of ache and a lot of pain and a lot of difficulty and a lot of trial. So now there is 12 years worth of difficulty and pain in the Prophet Muhammad's heart. So his heart is being washed away for that reason, so that he can enjoy this journey where he is about to go to Masjid al-Aqsa and go up to the heavens and go meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. And so that he can do this without the slightest bit of emotional distress that he had experienced in the last year and a half with Am al-Huzn, and then generally the difficulty throughout his entire prophethood so far, right? Especially with losing his wife and his uncle, and the journey of Ta'if and the persecution of Mecca becoming more and more severe. So all these things have now weighed down on the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they caused him a lot of difficulty and a lot of distress. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is going on this journey, but he's riding on an animal. He's riding on a ride. And what's that animal called? Anybody know? Buraq, right? It's the buraq, right? And so buraq is an animal that travels very, very fast, right? Travels very, very fast, right? Barq is lightning, right? Barq is lightning. So buraq, it's something that is traveling very, 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 very fast in that sense, right? So there was that animal named buraq, fast animal. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he sat on this animal. And once he sat on this animal, the animal started getting really jittery, getting really, really excited. And so Jibreel alayhi salam told the animal, calm down, because khayru khalqillah is upon you. The greatest of creation is upon you, right? Now, side note here, there's something very beautiful in the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where even the non-aqli creation loves him. Even the creation that doesn't have reasoning, that doesn't have intellect like we do, it loves the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We know the story about when he just started, the signs of his prophethood leading up to Iqra, how the rocks would be saying salam to him, the trees would be saying salam to him, and all these different type of stuff. And now in Medina as well, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he used to lean upon a tree. He used to lean upon a tree when he would be giving speeches. And so the companions, they noticed that he would be leaning upon this tree while he's giving his khutbahs, he's giving his talks. So what did they do? They decided to build a minbar for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? They decided that 3-step minbar for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And once the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stepped away from the tree, and it wasn't too far away from the tree, right? It's probably like the distance of me and that pole right now over there, right? So that's where the tree was, and the minbar was somewhere over here. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he would do, he would come and he would start preaching the message. He would start giving khutbahs. He would start addressing his companions, and the companions would hear wailing. They would hear weeping. They would hear crying. And they were wondering, where is this coming from? Because they're looking around and they're like, it's not one of us. And that's when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stepped down from the minbar and he went to the tree and he hugged the tree, and they realized that it's that tree stump that's crying, right? It's tree stump that's crying because it misses the fact that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to lean against it while giving his khutbahs and giving his addresses to the companions. And so that's so beautiful, right? It's so beautiful. But also one thing that we need to reflect on is, how can a creation with no aql, with no reasoning, with no intellect, beat us in love for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How many steps have we taken away from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a metaphorical respect from the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yet our eyes don't shed any tears? But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam took 2 steps away from a tree and the tree started to weep. Right? How is the non-aqli creation, the non-intellectual creation, beating us in love for the greatest of creation? Right? Now, along the way, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the angels would make stops, right? Jibreel alayhi salam was on his right, Mikael alayhi salam was on his left, and he had like this escort of angels that were going on this journey with him, with the Buraq, and they're riding to Bayt al-Maqdis right now. So right now, where are they going? They're going to Masjid al-Aqsa, right? They are on their way to Masjid al-Aqsa. And as they are going to Masjid al-Aqsa, they're making frequent stops. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is being told by Jibreel alayhi salam, get down and pray 2 rak'at. Get down and pray 2 rak'at. And the Prophet ﷺ would pray 2 rak'at, right? So first of all, they stopped where? Does anybody remember where they stopped? We talked about it last week. What was the first place they stopped? No, not the Kaaba. Kaaba is where the journey started, right? Medina. They stopped in Medina, right? They stopped in Medina. They started Medina first, and then they kept going, and they stopped where? Under the shade of the tree where Musa alayhi salam took refuge. And so now we see a parallel between the life of Musa alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he was in Ta'if, at his rock bottom, he sat under a tree and he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in desperation. Musa alayhi salam, in his rock bottom, he sat under a tree and he made dua in desperation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what's beautiful here as well, the next stop is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being in the area where Musa alayhi salam received revelation in Mount Sinai. Right? Mount Sinai. So that the Prophet Muhammad can see that as well. And then the Prophet Muhammad, he stopped on his journey again to a place called Bayt Lahm. What's Bayt Lahm, everybody? Bethlehem, right? This is in Palestine. This is the birthplace of who? Isa alayhi salam. Excellent. Isa alayhi salam. And so now, on the way, the Prophet Muhammad is seeing these symbolic things as well, right? And then he stopped on his way and he saw this symbolic gesture, this symbolic scene where there was people that were sowing their seeds and they were getting immediate harvest from those seeds. And so Jibreel alayhi salam likened it to what? Those who strive in the path of Allah and they get immediate turnover. They get immediate turnover in that sense. That if you strive in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your reward will increase 10-fold, 70-fold, 700-fold immediately. And then we also talked about the fragrance from the grave of the family that stood firm against Fir'aun. There was this family, the hairdresser of Fir'aun, where she dropped the brush and she said Bismillah. And then when Fir'aun heard about this, he tortured her and her family until death, and they died upon Iman. And so the Prophet ﷺ smelled a very beautiful fragrance while passing by the grave of that family. And Jibreel alayhi salam said that these are people that stood against Fir'aun, and described the story to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now, after that, the journey gets a little heavy. Okay, I'm gonna put a disclaimer here today that if this is your first time in this Seerah class, or maybe you haven't been here for a while, this isn't necessarily always going to be the main topic of discussion, right? But again, the journey of Isra wal Mi'raj, we want to go through the entire journey as it went, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ went through this journey in soul and body, and so we want to replicate that journey as best as we can, inshallah ta'ala, in these sessions as well. But the Prophet ﷺ now is going to go through a series of stops where he witnesses people being punished and the realities of their sins and why we should stay away from those sins. Okay? So, let's begin. ثم أتى على قوم ترضخ رؤوسهم بالصخر كلما رضخت عادت كما كانت. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he came upon a people whose heads were being brutally crushed. And every time their heads were crushed, the heads would be returned to their original form, and then their heads would be crushed again. لا يفتر عنهم من ذلك شيء. That it was a repetitive cycle of them just going back to its original form and being crushed again. And so, فَقَالَ مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَا جِبْرِيلُ. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Ya Jibreel, who are these people? What is going on here? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he responds and says, هَؤُلَاءِ الَّذِينَ تَشْتَغِلُ رُؤُوسُهُمْ عَنِ الصَّلَاةِ الْمَكْتُوبَةِ. That these are the people who, they used to prioritize everything else. They were always busy with work, they were always busy with school, they were always busy with this thing and this hobby and this gym and this game and whatever. But when it came time to scheduling and prioritizing their obligatory prayer, they're saying they're too busy for it, right? So they were busy with everything else. But as soon as the salah time came, they were too busy for that. They were too busy for that. And so they kept track of everything else, but they did not keep track of their prayers. And so that is what the reality of the sin of us skipping our obligatory prayers looks like in the akhirah. And what the Prophet ﷺ is seeing this. He's witnessing this. And ثُمَّ أَتَى عَلَى قَوْمٍ عَلَى أَقْبَالِهِمْ رِقَاعٌ وَعَلَى أَدْبَارِهِمْ رِقَاعٌ. Then they came upon a people that on top of them and on the back of them there were patches, right? يَسْرَحُونَ كَمَا تَسْرَحُ الْإِبْلُ وَالْغَنَمُ. And these people, they began wandering around and roaming around like camels and sheep. وَيَأْكُلُونَ الضِّرَاعَ. Right? وَيَأْكُلُونَ, الضَّرِيعَ. They were eating something called الضَّرِيعَ. What's الضَّرِيعَ? Does anybody know? لَيْسَ لَهُمْ طَعَامٌ إِلَّا مِنْ ضَرِيعَ. Right? لَيْسَ لَهُمْ طَعَامٌ إِلَّا مِنْ ضَرِيعَ لَا يُسْمِنُ وَلَا يُغْنِي مِنْ جُوعَ. They will have no food except ضَرِيعَ. And this ضَرِيعَ is not going to nourish them, and it's not going to satisfy their hunger in any way. Now, Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, he explains that ضَرِيعَ is this type of plant that's not only thorny, but it's like stuck down to the earth. And if it was wet, the Quraysh used to refer to something as called shibraq. Otherwise, when it's dried up and hard, it's called ضَرِيعَ. And no animal or creature goes near it or grazes on it. And if they go around it, it's extremely poisonous and it can kill them, right? So it's the worst type of food that someone can imagine. And then the Prophet ﷺ says they were also eating something called az-zaqum. Az-zaqum, right? Az-zaqum is another plant that's also mentioned in the Quran in multiple places. Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Surah Al-Safat, and Surah Al-Dukhan, right? And it's one of the food of the people of the hellfire. Now, Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, again, he explains what this zaqum is. And he says that it's derived from the word tazaqqum, which means to violently vomit something, right? Like violently vomit, like your insides are coming out. And so the zaqum is nourished by the hellfire and not by water. And so these people, they were wandering around like cattle, like sheep and camel, and they were eating ضَرِيعَ and zaqum. وَرَضَفَ جَهَنَّمَ وَحِجَارَتَهَا. And they were also eating the stones of the fire of hell. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, again, witnessing this, shocked by this, right? Just stunned by what is happening. He says, مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَا جِبْرِيلُ. He was concerned, right? The Prophet ﷺ's concern led him to ask, who are these people? Who are these people? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he responds and says, هَؤُلَاءِ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤَدُّونَ صَدَقَاتِ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. Right? These people that are roaming around and they're eating these very vile, difficult things to eat, and because they're starving, they have nothing else to eat, so they try to eat it, but even when they eat it, it doesn't even satisfy their hunger because of how horrific it is. These are the people that did not give their sadaqah. These are the people that did not give their zakah. Because in our deen, we believe that the zakat doesn't even belong to you. Your zakat is for the poor. Your zakat is the ownership of the poor, of the orphan, of the miskin. So when you don't give your zakat, you are holding on to something that is rightfully not yours to begin with. And so these are the people that did not give their zakat. They didn't think that zakat was worth their trouble. Right? They wanted to keep that 2.5% for themselves. They felt like that 2.5% was really going to be the difference between their survival or not. And which is why our deen is so merciful that only those who are eligible to give zakat have to give zakat. If you don't have enough money to give zakat in the first place, you don't have to give zakat. If you're not able to, if you don't have the means, so anybody that is giving zakat means they have the means to give zakat. So to have the means to give zakat and then withhold your zakat, like how terrible is that, right? How vicious is that? And so the Prophet ﷺ is saying that when this narration is telling us from Prophet ﷺ, this is what he witnessed in terms of the punishment of those who don't give their zakat. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he was so unsettled by seeing this. He was so unsettled by the people suffering. He's Rahmatul Alameen. You have to remember, he is the mercy to mankind. So when he sees anybody from mankind suffering or in pain, it gives him distress. And so he's worried for these people. And so that's when Jibreel alayhi salam gives him comfort. And he says, وَمَا ظَلَمَهُمُ اللَّهُ شَيْئًا وَمَا اللَّهُ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. That Jibreel alayhi salam, he saw the look on the Prophet ﷺ's face, and to put him at ease, Jibreel alayhi salam said, Allah did not wrong these people in the least bit. They did this to themselves. They did this to themselves. They were warned, they were told, they were warned, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them exactly how He told them He was going to punish them if they had done this. Okay, and then he continues, and he says, ثُمَّ أَتَى عَلَى قَوْمٍ بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ لَحْمٌ نَضِيجٌ فِي قُدُورٍ وَلَحْمٌ آخِرٌ نَيِّئٌ قَذِرٌ خَبِيثٌ. Then they came across another group of people. And right in front of these people, there was two huge pots, okay? One of these pots, one of these trays, had meat that was very well cooked, right? Think medium rare Wagyu steak, baby. Like super nice, right? Super good, it's perfect, it's exactly what everybody's looking for, it's exactly what everybody wants. And then right next to it, there is meat that is sitting on the ground, not even on a tray, and it's very raw and spoiled. فَجَعَلُوا يَأْكُلُونَ مِنَ النَّيِّ وَيَدْعُونَ النَّضِيجَ الطَّيِّبِ. These people, when they're told to move forward and eat, they rush towards the rotting raw meat and they leave alone the roasted good meat. Right? The medium rare Wagyu is just sitting there, and they go towards the raw and spoiled meat that has bugs and has pus and has all this disgusting stuff on it. And so now the Prophet ﷺ, again, astonished by what he's witnessing, he says, مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَا جِبْرِيلِ. Again, Ya Jibreel, what is this? What is going on here? And listen carefully. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is told by Jibreel alayhi salam, قال هذا الرجل من أمتك تكون عنده المرأة الحلال الطيب فيأتي امرأة خبيثة فيبيت عندها حتى يصبح والمرأة تقوم من عند زوجها حلالا طيبا فتأتي رجلا خبيثا فتبيت معه حتى تصبح. Jibreel alayhi salam, what does he say? He says, this is a man from your ummah who has a wife who he is properly married to, halal for her. And he says halal wa tayyib, right? Tayyib means basically everything that is good in this person. So not only is she halal for him, she's also attractive, she's also chaste, she's also a good character, has good deen, everything that a man could want in a spouse. Everything that a man could want in a spouse. Halal for you, tayyib for you. And all this, and he still goes to an immoral and sinful person and sinful woman and he sleeps with her instead. And he commits sins with her instead. And he spends the entire night with her instead. And then he says, among this crowd, you will also see people who are also women, who walk away from their husbands of also halal and tayyib, good character, attractive, good deen, excellent people, righteous people, and the woman will go and sleep with other sinful men. And she will stay the night with him until the morning time, right? By the way, I know I'm just skipping through these, but remember, each one of these we're going to go back to and kind of discuss more in depth. But for now, we're just going to talk about the scenes as they happen. ثم أتى على خشبة في الطريق لا يمر بها ثوب إلا شقته ولا شيء إلا خرقته. Then the Prophet ﷺ is passing by and he sees that there's a lot of wood lying around in the middle of the road. And anyone who passes by these kind of pieces of wood, their clothes would be torn and the wood is catching onto their clothes. And so they're jagged and sharp pieces and branches of wood that were sticking out and crowding the road. So travelers would have to squeeze on by. But there's not enough space, so the wood would catch onto their clothes, would catch onto their skin, and it was very difficult. It's basically like walking on glass. You ever heard the term walking on glass? Right? So it's like that. And so the Prophet ﷺ, again, what does he say? مَا هَذَا يَا جِبْرِيلٌ. The Prophet ﷺ is asking, what is this? What is going on? What am I witnessing here? هَذَا مَثْلُ أَقْوَامٍ مِّنْ أُمَّتِكَ يَقْعُدُونَ عَلَى الطَّرِيقِ فَيَقْطَعُونَهُ. That Jibreel alayhi salam said, this is the example of people from your ummah who they sit on the roads and paths that people travel across and they block people. ثُمَّ قَرَأَ Jibreel alayhi salam then recited the verse to the Prophet ﷺ and said what? وَلَا تَقْعُدُوا بِكُلِّ صِرَاطٍ تُوعِدُونَ وَتُصُدُّونَ. That do not sit along, in Surah Al-A'raf, do not sit along the paths and ways, making trouble for people, blocking people, and distracting people from the path of Allah. Right? Now this could have two meanings. According to the scholars, this could have two meanings. One, it's either people who sit along the path, and what do? When caravans come, when people come, they rob and they harm people. Or it's people that stand around and they try to confuse and lead the believers astray to shake their iman. Right? First of all, okay, one thing I want us to note here. The past two scenes that we saw. Okay? First of all, the scene that we saw is what? The one before was the one who is committing adultery, even though they have a wife or a husband that is halal for them. The second one is what? The people who are trying to either rob or harm people or lead people astray. But what's interesting, right, is Jibreel alayhi salam, for both of these, he said, min ummatik. You realize why this is important, right? What does he say? From your ummah. Because what happens whenever we read about punishments in the Quran, whenever we read about punishments in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, what's our first immediate reaction? Oh, that's them, not me. That's the disbelievers, not me. Right? That's the mushrikun, not me. So I don't have to worry about it. No. Jibreel alayhi salam said, these are people from your ummah that committed these actions, and these are the punishments. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us. So then again, the Prophet Muhammad, he continues on his way, and he went forward and he saw a man that was swimming in a river of blood, and rocks were being thrown and falling into the mouth of the man. And the Prophet ﷺ asked Jibreel alayhi salam who this man was, and Jibreel alayhi salam, he replied and he said, this is someone who consumed interest in their life. Someone who was corrupt and someone who abused riba and interest in their lifetime. And this is the scene that the Prophet ﷺ sees for such people. ثم أتى على رجل قد جمع حزمة حطب عظيمة لا يستطيع حملها وهو يزيد عليها. Then the Prophet ﷺ came across a group of people, and among them was someone who had a huge piece of luggage that was strapped to his back, and he was pinned to the ground, and he cannot lift himself up. He was being crushed to the ground. Not only that, but people were taking more luggage and adding it to the man's back. مَا هَذَا يَا جِبْرِيلٌ. Again, the Prophet ﷺ, seeing this, worried, astonished, what is going on here? He says, what is happening, Ya Jibreel? And Jibreel alayhi salam responds and says, هَذَا الرَّجُلُ مِنْ أُمَّتِكَ. Again, what is it? From your ummah. This is someone from ummatik. تَكُونُ عِنْدُهُ أَمَانَاتُ النَّاسِ لا يقدر على أدائها وهو يزيد عليها ويزيد أن يحملها فلا يستطيع ذلك. This is someone who has amana, right? Meaning that people gave him things for safekeeping. People trusted him with certain things, but he was not reliable. He did not return or uphold the people's amana. And he kept taking things from them, right? Like for example, let's say somebody gives you a bag full of like chocolate bars, and they say that I'm gonna be gone for a week. I need you to take care of these chocolate bars. They mean a lot to me. I don't want anybody to steal them, so I need you to watch over for them. And the bag has like 200 chocolate bars. Okay. Now you think to yourself, what? If I take one, he's not gonna notice. What's the difference? 200, 199. If I take one, he's not gonna notice. And you take one, right? This is what this is talking about. He did not give you permission to take. He did not tell you to take. He did not say you can take. You didn't ask. You just assumed. That was an amana that was given to you. I don't care how light it is. I don't care if it's a penny. I don't care if it's one bean, one rice. If an amana is given to you, you need to watch over that iman. Because you never know how serious and how important it might be to the other person. It might seem small and fragile to you, but it might be extremely important to that other person, right? So this is that example. That somebody is being given a lot of amana, and he's accepting a lot of amana. But with all the amana that he's being given, he's taking a little bit from here and here and here, an unnoticeable amount, so that what? So that I can kind of just get by, and nobody will notice, and I can increase my own provisions, right? Trying to fool people, trying to fool the system. ثم أتى على قوم تقرض ألسنتهم وشفاههم بمقارض من حديد كلما قرضت عادت كما كانت لا يفتر عنهم من ذلك شيء. Okay. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he came across a people whose tongues and their lips were being chopped off with huge scissors that were molded from iron. And every time they were chopped off, the tongues and the lips, they grew back. And this kept happening over and over again. Over and over again. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, again, what does he say? Who are these people, Ya Jibreel? And Jibreel alayhi salam responds, هَؤُلَاءِ خُطَبَاءُ أُمَّتِكَ. They are the preachers from your ummah. These are the scholars from your ummah. These are the people that call to your deen. These are the people that stood up on the minbar and preached your message. خُطَابُ الْفِتْنَةِ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. But they spread fitna in the sense of what? They used to, they would say what they preach what they don't practice. Right? Practice what you preach, right? They don't practice what they preach. They tell everybody to do this, but they don't do it themselves. They tell everybody to get up for Fajr, they don't get up for Fajr themselves. They tell everybody to fast, they don't fast themselves. They tell everybody to pay zakat, and they don't pay zakat themselves. Those preachers, those scholars that took advantage of your minbar in that sense, this is the punishment for them. This is the punishment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Now then the Prophet ﷺ, again, he came across a people who had, again, I told you guys this is going to be heavy today. I'm sorry, I apologize. It's going to be heavy today. But the Prophet ﷺ, he came across people who had nails that were made from copper. They were made from copper. And these people were literally peeling and scratching off their own faces and chests. Now the symbolism here is very important, because when you hear about why they are being punished this way, it's crucial. Because what's happening here? Every other punishment that we've seen so far, what's happening? Someone is doing it to them, right? Something is happening to them, or something is being done to them. In this scenario, what's happening? It's being done to themselves. It's self-inflicted. It's self-inflicted. They are doing it to themselves. Now, why is this? Why are they doing this to themselves? The Prophet ﷺ, again, he asked, who are these people? Who are these people, Ya Jibreel? And then Jibreel alayhi salam, he replies and said, these are the people who used to eat the flesh of other people. And they would lay their hands on people's honor and dignity. Now, were they cannibals? No? What does this mean? What is eating the flesh? Ghiba, yes. Slander, right? Talking bad, backbiting someone, right? And so there's a difference here. Jibreel alayhi salam is not talking about cannibalism, which is also haram, by the way. Don't do it, right? Nobody do that. It's also haram, right? I don't care if you say Bismillah, it's still haram, right? So, but the Prophet ﷺ, one time he was asked by the companions, right? The Prophet ﷺ telling the companions, don't do ghiba. And the companion said, oh, even if it's true, right? Even if it's true, where the Prophet ﷺ said, yes, that's what ghiba is. To say something that that the person that you're saying it about wouldn't appreciate you saying that about them if they're not there, right? If they're not there. So if there's something that you know somebody will not appreciate people talking about behind their back, even if it's true, it's a flaw they have, it's a difficulty that they have, it's a trial that they're going through, whatever it might be, and they don't appreciate people talking about it behind their backs, that's what ghiba is. Now what if somebody says something that's not true, right? That's what's called buhtan or tuhma, which is what? That's slander. That's not even true. That's slander. It's even worse, right? That you're making things up about another person because you want to bring them down, okay? Now I bring this up because again, these are self-inflicted sins. The Prophet ﷺ and the Quran is very clear about the punishments and very clear about how severe these sins are. So if somebody engages in them, do they have anybody to blame but themselves? No. And I don't care how many Arab cultures and Arab aunties like to try to do ghiba and buhtan in their day-to-day life. It is forever going to be haram. It is forever going to be impermissible. I don't care how many Arab uncles get together and talk about this person and that person. I don't care about how many so-and-so get together and this person. I don't care how normal our ummah this day tries to make it. It will never be okay. It will never be normal. It is extremely vile sin, and that's why this is the punishment for it. You're ruining someone's dignity and honor. That is the greatest thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon a person, is their own dignity and their own honor. And so to tear that down, you are tearing down the greatest gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. So it's not okay ever. Ever. And why there's such a severe warning against it. ثُمَّ أَتَى عَلَى حَجَرٍ صَغِيرٍ يُخْرُجُ مِنْهُ ثَوْرٌ عَظِيمٌ. Okay, first of all, backtrack a little bit. There are like some exceptional circumstances in which backbiting is considered permissible, but even then, those circumstances, they're not technically called backbiting because there's a bigger purpose behind it, right? So for example, someone goes and says, I'm going to murder so-and-so person, right? Don't tell anybody. Oh, I'm not going to backbite. It's like, no. Like at that point, you have to like do it at that point. That's not backbiting anymore. Backbiting has a very specific definition, and I'm specifically talking about ghiba and buhtan. I'm not talking about the exceptional circumstances. Okay? Wallahu ta'ala alam. Anyways, then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, ثُمَّ أَتَى عَلَى حَجَرٍ صَغِيرٍ يُخْرُجُ مِنْهُ ثَوْرٌ عَظِيمٌ. That the Prophet ﷺ, he came across a very small and tiny stone. Very small and tiny stone. And there was a huge bowl that came out of that tiny stone. فَجَعَلَ ثَوْرُ يُرِيدُ أَنَّ يَرْجَعَ مِنْ حَيْثُ خَرَجَ فَلَا يَسْتَطِيعُ. And so then, that bowl materialized out of the rock, and the bull then tried to shove himself back into the stone, but was unable to. And so the Prophet ﷺ again, what did he say? What is this? Ya Jibreel, what is happening here? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, هذا الرجل يتكلم بكلمات العظيمة ثم يندم عليها فلا يستطيع أن يردها. Jibreel alayhi salam said, this is someone who would say big things. They would stick their foot in their mouth. They would speak about major and serious issues. They would make things up. They would speak without knowledge, and they would regret what they said, but they are not able to take back what they say out of embarrassment. Meaning what? So, let's say, for example, somebody goes on the minbar and he says something that's a complete lie. Just makes something up, right? Just completely makes something up, makes up a hadith, makes up a verse from the Quran. And then he leaves. And then there's a little bit of regret there that the person has. A little bit of regret there. It's very serious now. You just did something extremely major. Now, what you have to do in order to be forgiven is you need to rectify it. It means you need to go back to that place where you lied and say, sorry, everybody, I lied, this is not true, and I ask you guys for forgiveness, right? Ask you guys for forgiveness. So it's a very serious issue. But they say that, oh, no, it's embarrassing, so I'm just going to leave it. And now there's going to be a group of people who are there living their entire lives thinking that this hadith or this verse from the Quran was true, and they're going to have no idea. Which is why it's very dangerous. Which is why the Prophet ﷺ emphasized more than anything against lying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. Because it has very serious consequences, not only in your own life, but it can seriously mess up other people's lives too. Right? And so this even extends to people that try to manipulate the sunnah to try to spiritually blackmail people. Right? That they try to spiritually blackmail people and things like that. They're trying to manipulate people because now it's not only harming you, but you're also harming other people. Now you have these people thinking that they have to live their lives a certain way that is very dangerous to them, that is very toxic to them, that is very mentally damaging, spiritually damaging, emotionally damaging to them, and they're being told that they have to live this way because the Quran and the Sunnah said so. And it's either being taken out of context or being twisted in some weird way. Right? Wallahu ta'ala alam. Right? So these are big issues. Okay. So all of these things, right? And by the way, there were some narrations even mention more, right? But I'll stop it here. But all of these things that we see, these are some of like the big major sins, very big major sins of Islam. Now, when it comes to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the early ages of Mecca, the early stages of Mecca, is the Prophet ﷺ, the first command, the first hukm of Islam was what? Does anybody know? What was the first command? Salah, right? Salah was the first major command of Islam for him and his ummah. And so what this did is this opened the doors of tarbiyah. Because the salah is a development of faith. The salah is what builds iman in people. When you truly know what you're saying and what you're doing when you're praying, it opens up a whole level of faith and iman in an individual. And it opens up the door of ordinance, of established rules and rituals of Islam, right? So for the first 13 years of the Prophet Muhammad's da'wah, it was very heavily focused on developing iman and developing faith in the believers, so that when prohibitions and when commands come down later on, it's a lot more easy to accept. And so all of this was leading to the establishment of the full-scale Muslim community in Medina. And that's why the first place the Prophet ﷺ was told to pray in that journey of Isra wal Mi'raj was Medina. Right? This beautiful tayyib ard, this beautiful pure land. And so all these things that the Prophet ﷺ had seen are some of the major sins that are now forbidden on the ummah. Taking interest, backbiting, committing adultery, etc. And so these very scary images that the Prophet ﷺ had seen were the realities of these sins. And these sins were painted were shown to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, so that when he prohibits these actions for us, when he tells us not to commit these sins, he is much more serious. When he warns us about it, that this is not a joke, you don't know what I saw. So when he's telling us, don't commit usury, don't commit adultery, don't backbite, don't preach what you don't preach what you don't practice. He's seeing those images in his head. And so now that changes the whole ballgame when we read these narrations. And so now everybody that wants to throw around, oh, Islam is just prohibition after prohibition. Islam is this, Islam is that. Right? Islam it's not a fun religion. Oh, what do you want fun for? This is the reality of the sins that is happening. This is what the Prophet ﷺ was visualizing in his head when he's telling us not to commit these sins. So it's serious. It's intense. And the reason why he was so staunch against it is because he loves you. Had he not loved you, he would have never shared these things with you. Had he not loved you, he would have never warned you about these things. He loved his ummah so much that he never wanted any of these things happen to us. So he's warning us again and again about it. The Prophet ﷺ cried for us. He bled for us. He sacrificed for us. He lost his family members for our sake. He cared very deeply for his ummah. He didn't want any harm to come to his ummah. The Sahaba would say the Prophet ﷺ was like a father to them. He thought of his own companions, as his own children. Didn't want any harm to come to his ummah. And we're his grandchildren. Doesn't want any harm to happen to us too. And so when the Prophet ﷺ says, don't do this, this is prohibited, this is haram, stay away from this, you have to understand the emotions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so he was on this miraculous journey, seeing all of this going on. And he kept asking Jibreel, what is this? Who are these people? What is happening? Why is this happening? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he would keep giving the Prophet ﷺ explanation after explanation. And then the Prophet ﷺ came back and informed us of everything that he saw so that we could also keep this in mind. That this is the ugliness of these sins. And secondly, this is also the punishment of these sins in the hellfire as well. And so that reality was given that day. ثم أتى على واد فوجد ريحا طيبة باردة وفيه ريح المسك وسمع صوتا. And so now, after all these difficult scenes, the Prophet ﷺ is receiving some comforts, receiving some grace, receiving some reprieve. And he says, that the narration says that the Prophet ﷺ now, he arrived at a valley. And there was a very cool and beautiful breeze that smelled like musk. Then he heard a sound. يا جبريل ما هذه الريح الطيبة الباردة وهذه الرائحة التي كريح المسك وما هذا الصوت. And so he asked Jibreel alayhi salam, Ya Jibreel, what is this sound? What is this very cool breeze and beautiful breeze that smells like musk? And this very beautiful sound that I'm hearing. Again, let me pause. Important thing here to note. When it comes to the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, you also have to remember, Prophet ﷺ was very careful with his wording, and he was very particular about the things that he says and when he says it. Previously, all the punishments that he was witnessing, every time he would say, what is this, Ya Jibreel? Why is this happening, Ya Jibreel? Who are these people, Ya Jibreel? Because he's Rahmatul Alameen, the mercy in his heart, he couldn't even come up with the words to repeat what he was seeing. You understand what I'm saying? So the scenes were so difficult on the heart of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that he couldn't even repeat what he was seeing. But the moment that he smelt the beautiful breeze and the sound, he doesn't just say, what is this, Ya Jibreel? He says, what is this beautiful smell that I'm smelling that smells like musk, and this beautiful sound that I'm hearing that I can listen to all day? What is this? Now he can talk about it all day. Because now this is what he wants for his ummah. Oh, I want that. I don't want what happened to my ummah and all these different scenarios and all these scenes that I was witnessing before. I want that for my ummah. And so what does Jibreel alayhi salam say? He says, هَذَا صَوْتُ الْجَنَّةِ. This is the sound of paradise. This is the voice of paradise. And paradise is making dua to his creator. Paradise is speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Rabbi, atini ma wa'attani, faqad kathurat ghurafi. Jannah is making dua, says, Ya Rabbi, bring me what you have promised me. Bring to me what you have promised me, because my rooms are very abundant. وَإِسْتَبَرَقِي وَحَرِيرِي, and my couches are very abundant, and my cushions are very abundant. وَسُنْدُسٍ وَعَبَقَارِي, and the silk I contain that are very abundant. وَلُؤْلُؤِي وَمَرْجَانِي وَفِضَّتِي وَذَهَبِي, and all these beautiful clothing and pearls and jewels and goblets and gold and silver, وأكوابي وصحافي وأباريقي وفواكهي ونخلي ورماني ولبني وخمري, all of these things. My transportation, my the plates of Jannah, the rivers of honey, the abundant rivers of milk, the abundant rivers of pure wine, all of this is extremely abundant in me, Ya Allah. فَآتِينِي مَا وَعَدْتَنِي. So when will you bring to me that which you have promised me? And who is Jannah talking about here? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to Jannah. And He says, لَكِ كُلُّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ وَمُؤْمِنٍ وَمُؤْمِنَةٍ. For you, that is promised for you, will be every Muslim man and woman, and every believing man and woman. وَمَنْ آمَنَ بِي وَبِرُسُولِي وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَلَمْ يُشْرِكْ بِي وَلَمْ يَتَّخِذْ مِنْ دُونِي أَنْدَادًا وَمَنْ خَشِينِي فَهُوَ آمِنٌ وَمَنْ سَأَلَنِي أَعْطَيْتُهُ وَمَنْ أَقْرَضَنِي جزيته ومن توكل علي كفيته إني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا لا أخلف الميعاد وقد أفلح المؤمنون وتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. That the people who believed in me and my messengers, and those who did good deeds, and they did not associate any partners with me, and someone who is overwhelmed when they think of me, someone who fears me, someone who believes in Allah, whoever asks me of anything, I will give to them. And someone who gives me alone, meaning someone who gives charity in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I reward them. Someone who puts their trust in me, I take care of that person. And without a doubt, I am most definitely the one Allah. There is no one, anybody ever that is worthy of worship except me, and I do not break my promises. And the believers have achieved success, and Allah is the giver of all these blessings. And Jannah responds and He says, قَدْ رَضَيْتُ, right? I am, or قَدْ رَضِيتُ, that I am satisfied with that, my Lord. ثُمَّ أَتَى عَلَى وَادٍ فَسَمَعَ صَوْتًا مُنْكَرًا وَوَجَدَ رِيحًا منتنتا. Then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he again continues on, and he arrived at another valley. And in this valley, now he hears a very scary and terrible sound. And then he comes across a scent in that valley that's very repulsive and very disgusting. And so what does he say? مَا هَذِهِ يَا جِبْرِيلُ, right? What is this, Ya Jibreel? And Jibreel alayhi salam says, هَذَا صَوْتُ جَهَنَّمْ. This is the voice of Jahannam. And Jahannam is also making dua to Allah. It's also making dua to Allah. And Jahannam is what? Because Jahannam is what? Jahannam is a creation of Allah. Jahannam is a creation of Allah. It's actually a servant of Allah. It's a slave of Allah. Because what does Jahannam do? Jahannam does exactly what it's told to do. The angels are told, they do exactly what they're told to do. The angels of the hellfire, they're just told exactly what they're told to do. There's one very scary narration I read one time where the people of hellfire will be begging the angels of the hellfire that are inflicting the punishments, like, have mercy on us, have mercy on us. And the angels will say, you don't understand. You're an assignment to me. I don't feel mercy. What mercy? I'm just told what to do and I do it. And so some of the descriptions of the angels of the hellfire, they have like very dark faces, and they look very like depressed and kind of like scary, like they haven't seen any joy or anything like hopeful in their lives ever. Because that's literally what they were created to do. And so Jahannam is just another servant of Allah, it's just another creation of Allah that is going to do exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks it to do. And so Jahannam is literally making dua to Allah and saying, Ya Rabbi, atini ma wa'attani. فقد كثرت سلاسلي وأغلالي وسعيري وجحيمي وضريعي وغساقي وعذابي وعقابي وقد بعد قعيري واشتد حري فآتاني ما وعدتني. Ya Rabbi, bring to me that what you promised, because my chains and my shackles and my flames and my boiling hot water and my dori'a, the thorny plants, and my soup that's made out of, the ghasaq is like a soup that's made out of like pus and blood. I am abundant in these things. And my depth is very, very far. The bottom of the fire of hell is very deep. And my temperature is constantly rising. Bring to me, O Allah, what you promised me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to Jahannam and says, لَكِ كُلُّ مُشْرِكٍ وَمُشْرِكَةٍ وَكَافِرٍ وَكَافِرَةٍ وَكُلُّ خَبِيثٍ وَخَبِيثَةٍ وَكُلُّ جَبَّارٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُ بِيَوْمِ الْحِسَابِ. That for you will be every shirk committing man and woman, everybody that associated partners to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every man and woman, every disbelieving man and woman, every evil man and woman, and each and every single hard-hearted soul that was filled with diseases of the heart, with backbiting and racism and etc., all these hard-hearted souls who are jabbar, who are people who are kind of like arrogant and boastful and kind of were very oppressive on this earth, those people, they will all be in the hellfire, and all those are the people who do not believe in the Yawm al-Hisab, the day of reckoning. Because if they did believe in the day of judgment, they wouldn't act in this manner. قَدَ رَضِيتُ. Then Jahannam responds, says, I am satisfied with that, my Lord. Then the Prophet ﷺ told his Sahaba that he saw the Dajjal, the Antichrist, in its true form. And one of the Sahaba asked, Ya Rasulullah, how did you see him? What did you see? And the Prophet ﷺ said, I saw him with my own eyes, and I saw that he was kind of like a very stocky man. One of his eyes was damaged and bulging out, and his hair was wild and frayed like the branches of a tree. And I would say that he looked something like Abdul Uzza ibn Quttam, who was somebody that was, kind of living amongst them from the mushrikun. And he said, I saw a beautiful, pristine white pillar that looked like it was carved out of pearls. And there were angels carrying this pearl, and I asked them what they were carrying, and they said, this is the pillar of Islam, and we were commanded to place this in Ash-Sham, Syria, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aid our brothers and sisters in Syria. So there's a special honor that is given to the people of Syria here as well. And so as the Prophet ﷺ, he kept going forward, someone from his right called to him and said, Ya Muhammad, wait for me, I need to ask you something. Prophet ﷺ didn't feel good about it, so he didn't respond. Something in his fitrah, something in the inspiration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that moment told him to not respond, so he didn't respond. And throughout this entire journey, before the Prophet ﷺ does anything, he always asks Jibreel alayhi salam a question. And Jibreel alayhi salam, now he's the teacher. You have to remember, he's the teacher of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So he's the teacher. So now, the Prophet ﷺ is faced with something unusual. And so instead of trying to handle it himself, his teacher, his guide, his mentor is right there. So what does he do? He says, what is going on, Ya Jibreel? And Jibreel alayhi salam said, this is a caller from the Yahud. This is a caller from someone from the Jewish faith. And if you would have responded to him, then your ummah would have turned to Judaism. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he kept going forward, and someone called from his left side and said, Ya Muhammad, wait for me, I need to ask you something. Same thing. Prophet did not respond. He asked Jibreel alayhi salam what's going on and said, this is a caller from the An-Nasara, the Christians. And if you would have responded to him, then your ummah would have turned to Christianity. Now what does this mean? Okay? It is interesting because the scholars, they bring some commentary here. And they say being called from both sides and not responding, and then going straight forward. What does this mean? First of all, this is a representation of the Al-Hanifa, which is the straight path that Ibrahim alayhi salam walked upon. You don't let the things that are coming at you distract you from moving forward. You keep moving forward, you keep on that straight path. Al-Sirat al-Mustaqim. Mustaqim means what, right? When we translate Sirat al-Mustaqim, we mean what? The straight path, right? But Mustaqim is not only straight, it also comes from the word what? Istiqama, which means consistency. So it's the consistently straight path. It means it's the only straight path. And consistency is key. When you don't want to wake up for Fajr, that's the most important time to wake up for Fajr, because you need that consistency in your life. When you don't want to fast, that's the most important time to fast, because you need that consistency in your life. When you don't want to open the Quran, you open the Quran, because that's the time you need the consistency in your life. You know how people talk about the gym and they say 90% of the battle is just going there? Because once you go there, what happens? You're not just going to sit there and do nothing. You're going to do something. You're going to work out a little bit. You might have a lazy workout, but you had a workout, which is better than not showing up at all, right? So they'd say 95% of the battle of going to the gym is what? Just showing up. I kid you not, this is the exact same thing with the Quran. 95% of the battle is just opening the Quran. Because everything's telling you, I'm busy, it's... And then once you open the Quran and you start reading a little bit, that comfort you find in your heart, that ease, that beauty, knowing you're being rewarded for every letter that you're reciting. Every word that you're reciting, you're getting 10s and 70 and 700 times reward. Your scales are just being filled with every letter that you're reading, whether you even know what that word is saying or not. Now it's like, oh, alhamdulillah, I made it. I opened it. Even if I just did one line, I get some workout in, better than nothing. And so 95% of the battle of most of our ibadah is literally just showing up. Just getting there. So just get there, right? Consistently, with istiqamah. Now, by saying your ummah could have gone to Judaism or Christianity, some scholars say that it is a literal meaning, like your ummah would have been confused and possibly fallen into the fitna and actually converting into those religions. But some muhaddithun and scholars of Seerah also explain this to mean that your ummah would have maybe fallen into the same trials, tribulations, distractions, and theological problems that the Yahud and the Nasara fell into, that the Jews and the Christians fell into. That you would have fallen into something called like the rejecting of faith, right? Altering the faith, trying to trick Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the personification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all these different things. Yeah, they could have fallen into that. And so this is representative of the Prophet ﷺ saying, just as you didn't pay attention to the person who called out to your left and your right, don't worry about the noise. Again, this is how we apply this in our lives today. If there's any take-home lesson, it's this here today. Don't worry about the noise. Keep on that straight path. There's going to be distractions every day. There's going to be people that are trying to doubt you every day or cause you to have doubt every single day. Just keep on that sirat al-mustaqim, that consistent straight path. Look forward, don't look to your side. Don't look back. As long as you keep moving on that straight path, as long as you continue to walk down that straight path, and you bring your ummah with you to that straight path, your ummah will keep following you on that straight path, and you will be okay until the end of times. Until the end of the day. Their iman will be okay. Right? That's all I had today. So, alhamdulillah, we can conclude here, inshallah. I expected to spend a little bit more time, than expected, but alhamdulillah, right? We have some time before Maghrib. We can engage in dua and adhkar. I'll also take a couple questions, inshallah, if anybody has any, whether online. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great question. So sister's asking, so many of the punishments that we talked about, mentioned min ummatik, right? So people that are from the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, that engage in these sins, and they're being punished for it. There's a couple of things, you have to remember. First of all, this is with the understanding, right? The understanding, this is people that did not do tawbah of their sins, okay? So first of all, these are people that were kind of like, they were Muslim, yes, but then they saw their sins as no big deal. So they didn't take the time to have remorse and ask for forgiveness of those sins, right? So if you have remorse and you ask for forgiveness of those sins, we believe in the husn dhan of Allah and the good opinion of Allah that He will forgive those sins, right? That He will forgive those sins. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, or Prophet ﷺ mentions in many ahadith, it talks about those who are hopeful of forgiveness will receive forgiveness. So sometimes what does the question come up? How do I know I'm forgiven, right? I don't get any wahi, I don't get any text message on my phone. That would be great, right? But I don't get that. So how do I know? The Prophet ﷺ told us that if you hoped to be forgiven, and you had that remorse, and you did what was necessary for you to be forgiven, then you just consider it that you are forgiven. Alhamdulillah, right? And so when it comes to theologically speaking, though, we believe that when we get to Yawm al-Hisab, the day of accounts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will weigh and count our deeds, right? Will weigh and count our deeds. If our misdeeds outweigh our good deeds as believers, then we will be punished according to those misdeeds, and every time we receive one punishment, your misdeed is crossed off until you reach at an equal level, and then you're taken out of the hellfire and put into paradise. So we do believe that every believing man and woman will eventually make it to paradise, even if some of them are punished first, right? But again, as you saw, no one really wants to experience those punishments, even if it's for a little bit of time, right? There's actually one narration. Prophet ﷺ talks about two people, right? This is probably one of my favorite go-to narrations. So I'm sorry if you've heard me say it 100 times. I'm going to say it again. Right? Because it really summarizes our whole purpose here in this life. It's narration Sahih Muslim, two people that are going to be brought forth on the Day of Judgment. One person is the person that worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala but suffered more than anybody in this life. Had a lot of difficulty, a lot of pain, but was always patient and persistent and had that istiqamah. And so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will instruct the angels to dip him into paradise for 1 second. Not even a second. The narration literally says 1 moment. So it might even be less than a second. And then before everybody, all of creation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask this individual, what? Did you ever feel any pain? Did you ever feel any suffering? What is this man going to say? By Allah, I don't even know what suffering is. I don't even know what pain is. After 1 moment in paradise, you're going to forget everything in this life. Right? Every pain in this life. Now the opposite is also true. Right? Wealthy person, abundant person, all the pleasures in this life, never worshipped Allah, just constantly engaging in everything that he wants in this life, living the best life, right? On that YOLO lifestyle all his life. And so then, Prophet ﷺ says that the angels will take him and dip him into the hellfire for 1 second, right? And then be brought back out. Now, first of all, that first one, they say when he comes out, he's going to be like shining. Person's going to be like shining, right? This one, the person's going to literally look like he was just like charred. Like after 1 moment in the hellfire, he's going to be charred. And so then before everybody, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask him, have you ever felt any joy? And what does he say? He says, by Allah, I don't even know what joy is. I don't even know what pleasure is. What are you talking about? Right? So after 1 second in our destination in the akhirah, we're going to forget all the pain or all the pleasure in this life, depending on where we end up. Right? And so this hadith right here, it summarizes our whole purpose in this life. Right? And what we're trying to aim towards. So yeah, every believing man and woman, even that with a mustard seed of faith, or even just saying La ilaha illallah once in their lifetime and didn't say anything else, every believing man and woman will enter paradise at some point. But those that had more bad deeds than good deeds will need to pay for those bad deeds, essentially. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Yes, Abdul Hadi.
You mentioned earlier that one of the stops, the first stop maybe, of people who were being punished were people who were having their heads crushed repeatedly, and that these were people who did not pay their salah. So, at what point
1 second, I can't hear a thing you're saying. Welcome to downtown Seattle. This is Abdul Hadi's like first week, so you're gonna learn real quick, inshallah. Go ahead, Habib.
At what point then was salah legislated, or did the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam know that salah was to be legislated then?
Yeah, so salah was legislated from like day 1, right? But the details of salah came periodically. So during this journey of Isra wal Mi'raj, we're gonna get the 5 daily prayers, right? But when salah first came, it was actually the tahajjud salah that was obligatory, right? On the believers and things like that. And then it was like the morning and evening prayer and et cetera, et cetera. But the details of the 5 prayers, the Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, 2, 4, 4, 3, 4, that's going to come during the Isra wal Mi'raj. So during this journey that we're talking about right now, that will come. But other versions of salah were obligatory even from like day 1 of Islam, right? Day 1 of the revelation. So good question. Yeah, go ahead.
I have noticed recently there have been different organizations that have been sort of reinterpreting Islam and changing certain things, and claiming that certain things are halal, things are not, or haram, things are not. And I feel like that people who are convinced by the independent arguments and maybe potentially fall under that description of their believer these things. Obviously, Allahu A'lam, the level of responsibility they low performance, because if you're misguided, it's not your fault. That's different than if you are just trying to convince yourself of something. But I guess from an individual perspective, how rigorous does the individual need to be over certain things? When they're going about getting advice about things or hearing differences of opinion, because there is a certain level of difference of opinion, but like protecting yourself essentially from like falling into potentially an opinion that's actually not valid.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So for the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Al-halalu bayin, wal-haramu bayin, wa baynahuma umurun mutashabihat." Right? The halal is clear, the haram is clear, and between them, we'll call them gray areas. Right? Things in between that are gray areas. Right? So when it comes to, because I know I'm familiar, there's a lot of, discourse out there about what's halal, what's haram, and things like that. First thing that we have to take into consideration when these narrations are talking about, they're talking about the things that are unanimously agreed upon. Okay? So for example, someone tries to come and claim that zakat is no longer obligatory because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not alive. Right? That's actually what happened during the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq, and Abu Bakr Siddiq literally waged war against those people. Right? That's something that's like, it's clear cut, there's no discussion whatsoever. Right? Now there are other things where there is a legitimate difference of opinion amongst the scholars, amongst the madhahib, the schools of thought, about whether this is permissible, whether it's not permissible, right? Those ones you're going to have to kind of treat on a case-by-case basis, right? Generally speaking, if there's something that has difference of opinion, you shouldn't condemn someone for doing it, right? You shouldn't condemn someone for doing it. So, wallahu ta'ala alam, but I don't think that they would fall under that category because they're following scholarly opinion. And that's what's important, right? If someone is following an opinion, but they don't know where they got it from, they're just doing it just cause, then that's actually a problem, right? You need to know why you're doing what you're doing. So there should be some type of scholarly opinion that is backing what you are doing. And even if somebody else disagrees with it, if you can point towards a scholarly opinion, then you should be okay in that sense, inshallah. Does that answer the question?
A little bit. I think like a little follow-up to that is like there are certain things where sometimes you might have a scholar who they present to you an opinion and they have reached that conclusion themselves in a very rigorous way.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't follow. It might be like its own difference of opinion rather than like the difference of opinion that's accepted in the mainstream of it. How do you, I guess, protect yourself from one, potentially just hearing that for the first time and then following it straight up? And two, how do you gauge when it might be okay to follow a niche opinion versus when you should play it safer? I mean, generally, you should play it safer, but like, sometimes there are case-by-case cases. So how do you know when you can follow something that's like more case-by-case versus following something?
Yeah, so you ask a very good question, and this is something that requires a lot of like discussion of usul al-fiqh, because there's the element of ijtihad, there's the element of tradition, and things like that kind of come about. However, generally speaking, try not to get too technical or complicated, there are two things that you want to consider. When it's an opinion that is generally like has a tradition, right? Like it's something that is founded in our deen, something that we have known in our deen for a very long time, you want to stick with tradition, right? You don't want to stray away from someone coming up with something new in that sense. However, here's where it gets kind of very tough, and now it's with new issues, right? Technology, AI, all this different type of stuff, where modern scholars are trying to come up with different fatwa, right? In that situation, what I would recommend, again, is to stick with someone that you trust, stick with someone that has a good track record, and someone that also has credibility amongst the scholarly field, right? Someone who generally all the scholars accept. You don't want to find somebody that like every scholar is telling you don't listen to that person and be like, oh, but he's still a scholar, right? Because like I mentioned in here, there are going to be preachers and imams and things like that unfortunately have corrupted intentions. So you want to generally find someone that is, accepted amongst the peer of tradition, right? Because what happens is they use the traditional usul to come up with modern rulings. They don't make up new usul and new principles, right? So, it's tough in that sense. So for anything that is historical, we have, already rulings for it. Stick with your tradition. Anything new that requires ijtihad and requires scholars to kind of come together and figure out rulings, that's where you either follow an individual that you really trust, or even better yet, follow a body, right? Like there's these organizations where they're a group of scholars, like AMJA or Fiqh Council of North America, things like that. Because now it's just not one individual. There's like dozens of scholars that are releasing a fatwa together. So it gives it more credibility, if that makes sense. Yeah. Wallahu a'lam. How much time do we have? Maghrib came in, right? Okay, inshallah. We'll pause here. Actually, there's one question real quick online that I'll just address. I saw. Yes, we will be discussing Isra wal Mi'raj next week. And as a matter of fact, we'll probably be discussing Isra wal Mi'raj for the next 5-7 weeks. I'm not gonna lie. It's gonna be a long journey, inshallah. But the journey itself was quick because it happened in a blink of an eye, technically, physically. But the metaphysical journey aspect of it is something that is a lot of detail. Wallahu ta'ala alam, inshallah. So I'll see you guys next week, inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.